what makes great stakeholder partnership, what makes a great proactive recruiter who can manage a funnel really well. Because it's not just about the hiring, it's how you set all of those non-traditional backgrounds or profiles who may require a bit more ramping. It's how you set them up for success. It is a struggle to be a working parent, especially a working mother in a global pandemic. Even not in a global pandemic, it's hard. I'm actually really excited for what the next several months are going to bring for talent acquisitions teams to really take a pause, take a breath, and reflect on what makes great hiring in their respective organizations. And in a world where for the past 2.5 years, we've had so much pressure on growth and scale and volume, we can actually learn from what the past 2 years have brought us.
Welcome, Becky. How's it going?
I'm doing great, Chris. It's great to see you.
I wanted to jump in because you've got a really interesting background and journey into the role you have now. Obviously, you started your career in finance. How did the move into recruiting happen? Can you kind of talk through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny to be having this conversation or reflecting on this now because the recession or the years leading up to the recession in 2008 were actually what got me into the people and talent space. So it's been really interesting to reflect on the reasons that got me into recruiting as we are in a really tenuous time in the market. So I started my career in a corporate strategy role in financial services, was at one of the financial firms that was kind of at the thriving at the peak of the housing market, and then really at the center of the crisis as it started in 2007 and 2008. And it impacted the company significantly. We had a dramatic CEO change, massive restructuring, a bunch of my department was laid off. And during that time, I watched the way that the organization communicated, how employees were treated, and frankly, the lack of transparency during really uncertain times. And I thought, my gosh, there has to be a way that this can be done better. And we can, a company can really put employees first. And so I had an amazing opportunity to go back to graduate school and pursue an MBA, and took the road less traveled and focused on HR and people topics within an MBA program, which 10, 15 years ago, no one really did that. You go to an MBA program for finance or marketing or general management. But it was really great. It was a kind of a gift to be in business school during the recession of 2008 and beyond, to watch how organizations navigated change and to be a part of discussions and case studies with professors on how to be a people leader during times of change, on how to drive organizational change in small and bold ways. And so that's what really got me excited about being in a people or talent role coming out of graduate school, and focusing on identifying what makes a great leader, on attracting great leaders to evolving companies. And so that's kind of my first foray into recruiting. I definitely did not grow up thinking I wanted to be a recruiter, but it's been an amazing journey.
Awesome. That's so interesting, and obviously very relevant to today and what's happening. Can you draw any parallels from that period that you were going through in that recession to learnings that you're now using in what's going on in the industry now, and I guess how to lead teams through these rough times?
I think, and it's funny because I actually think if we had had this conversation 6 weeks ago, my answer might be totally different. Things are changing so dramatically right now. I think the biggest thing I've learned as a leader is so two things. One, you yourself getting comfortable with not having all the answers, and then being comfortable telling your team that you do not have all the answers. At the same time, being able to be really clear on what is in your control and what's not in your control, and focus on controlling the controllables at a time when there are so many unknowns and uncertainties. So for example, I don't know what the next 6 months are going to look like. I do know that I have a team of remarkable recruiters who are focused on creating a great candidate experience, and they can do that whether the market is at its peak or at its floor. And so really ensuring that my team throughout all of this is focusing on continuing to make great hires, to go back to basics on a really objective, inclusive processes, to find ways to optimize processes with their hiring teams, and to develop great stakeholder relationships, you can do all of those things in a great market or in a terrible market. And so I frankly believe that focusing on the controllables and keeping an eye on, what we're ultimately solving for in the long term is what's going to help any organization kind of navigate the uncertainty of what's going to happen in the next several months.
Absolutely. Do you feel like, obviously we've just gone through a massive boom over the last 12 months or so. Do you feel like recruiters and recruiting teams and companies in general get complacent during that time and maybe stop focusing as much on the candidate experience or and the processes?
It's interesting. I think it depends on the company. It depends on the culture and how much a company values its culture in how they hire. I'm fortunate to be at a company where we put our culture and our employees first. We put our customers first, but we recognize that our employees are what makes a great customer experience. And so it's been really important to us as we have grown and scaled really rapidly to not regress to the mean in terms of mediocre hiring or passing the buck on accountability and hiring decisions or focusing on volume over quality. And let's be really clear, we've got a lot to learn. There are aspects of our operating system that are breaking, but I think it really, I think the past couple of years as organizations have grown so dramatically and TA teams have scaled so rapidly is recognizing when those growing pains are hitting and finding ways to go back to the basics and going back to your mission and values as a company. I'd be curious even to hear, Chris, what you are seeing across the board. I think, there are so many companies that are just focused on getting a butt in a seat. And so it's about scaling the machine. And so you see that impact candidate experience. And I think there's a balance of maintaining that, white glove treatment or real, transparency or interactiveness while also acknowledging that might not be scalable at the level of the volume of hiring that you're doing.
Yeah, I think the last 12 months have been, what we've been seeing in the market is there's been a real rush to bring in talent. And clearly companies have been growing really dramatically and in a way that they haven't before. So they didn't have the processes set up to bring that number of and volume of hires into the business. They didn't really understand what it took to get that many hires in terms of interview hours, in terms of, onboarding, whatever else it might be. And I think for the most part, they probably hired people in with not enough experience because they underestimate what recruiting actually is because they don't have the function and they've not really had a great function before. So I think that there's clearly been some challenges in the market, and hopefully, one of the good things that comes out of this market cooling down, I think, is maybe a reset. People looking at what is actually working for them, having a focus on quality, and really building that solid function. I think unfortunately though, in times like this, it seems like recruiters are in massive demand when it's going crazy, and they're the first ones to go when it's not. So we might see a repeat of COVID where there was just a huge demand again and a huge spike.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling pretty positive.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That was such a big learning for me and our team in the past 2 years. And it's something I'm super mindful of going into the next, 12 to 24 months, is the capacity that your organization has to scale rapidly, not just your recruiting team. So when we, really started to see a steep recovery in the second half of 2020, we went and hired a ton of recruiters, which was great. And we doubled more than from January 2020 to today. We've more than tripled the size of our recruiting team. That's amazing growth. But you don't think about the operational enablement or the interviewer enablement that needs to go along with that. And with all of that hiring we were doing, two things became very clear. One, we didn't have enough managers to actually take on all of these new hires that we were bringing on at the individual contributor level. And two, we didn't have enough interviewers who are really well versed in interviewing for the skills and attributes across the various areas of the company. And so interviewer enablement has become like a number one priority within our team, and is going to be a big focus for us in the second half of this year, so that when we do recover, we have a really scaled, mature cohort of interviewers who can be really calibrated, are really thoughtful about inclusion and objectivity in our process, and can help us kind of lay the foundation. So I'm with you. I think, if anything, it's going to see the recruiting teams that are super thoughtful and thinking about the long term are just going to shift their recruiters away from focusing on execution and just filling recs to optimizing their processes, training their interviewers, really nailing some of the values that are really important in their process.
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com.
How do you really nail that interview enablement, that operation enablement? Because I'm guessing it requires quite a lot of buy-in from the people to give their time up and to really see the importance of getting that right. Like, what have you found a successful strategy in getting that buy-in from the company?
So if I were to characterize our interviewer enablement now, it's a super lightweight e-learning, and anything else is ad hoc. It's reactive to like a recruiter identifying a problem in a hiring process, and it's totally done by a recruiter on the side of their desk. It's not like a core part of their job. And so what that creates is a really inconsistent experience and inconsistent bar for what it means to be a great interviewer. When our now CEO and I started talking about interviewer enablement as a core competency, we started talking about that a year and a half ago. And so I think to answer your question, it starts with buy-in from the top. And I, am really proud to work with a leadership team that recognizes that hiring and developing and retaining talent and developing high-performing teams is a core attribute of being a leader. And so it started with socializing that across all of our leaders. It started with getting alignment from our executive team that, hey, our recruiting org is going to focus on developing this as a core competency, and it's going to take time and it's going to take buy-in. And so getting that buy-in is really important. I find showing the data is really important. I can talk to you all you want about the number of hires we're going to make in the next 5 years, but if I translate that to the number of interview hours and tell a head of sales that they are going to have to find, thousands of interview hours, tens of thousands of interview hours over the course of the next 5 years, they're like, holy moly, I better have a good team that can do this well. And so being able to get the conceptual buy-in, marrying it with data, and then now what's happening is my team is starting to run some pilot programs in more of a decentralized fashion, and then working to centralize it at a company-wide framework.
It's really cool. And I'm sure a lot of people are out there maybe facing problems in their organizational challenges and really need to get that buy-in, or trying to find a way to get that buy-in. Clearly, you've done a great job of articulating that to the C-suite and then doing the pilots and showing the data. What advice would you give to someone who has come across a problem they think is really important and needs to get that buy-in? What steps should they take, or initial step at least, on that journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there are a couple of things that I found have worked really well. I think using the data is always incredibly helpful. Show, business leaders care about how it hits their team's productivity, how it hits their wallets, and how it hits their business performance. And so being able to show, for example, hey, here's what our conversion rates look like now. But if, for example, better interviewing means we increase our conversions by 20%, this is the number of fewer interviews we have to do over the course of the next 5 years. And so, really getting into the data on how your talent pipelines are running and being able to show some assumptions and do different scenarios has been really helpful. I think the second thing is find allies and champions in the business. I'm fortunate to be surrounded by a bunch of colleagues who are super passionate about hiring, and being able to say to them, hey, I'm going to do a pilot within your team, and then I want to make sure we can share it with the broader leadership team. Or, hey, I need your help pushing on this, and being my advocate in a bigger group meeting. I think getting those allies in the business is super, super helpful. And then I think you got to follow through on good execution. And so I don't like to commit to something that my team can't deliver on. And so managing expectations on a really solid project plan with clear deliverables and clear measures of success is another thing that, I think helps. And you start small and show incremental progress, and that can help you build a case for bigger, larger scale change.
Yeah, I really love that you said where you're talking about building allies in the business and people who can support you and advocate for your cause internally. I really, really like that. And I'd be interested to know if you find that as a more difficult challenge in a remote world versus, being in office. And do you have to approach, building those relationships or getting those advocates in a different way? Now the world's more, remote.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I see people struggle with in various ways. And I think it depends on your company. So at HubSpot, we've always been relatively distributed. And more importantly, our leadership team, even pre-COVID, was quite distributed across geographies. We do not have a culture where you have to be in proximity to HQ in Cambridge, Massachusetts in order to be a leader. And so we've always had I've communicated on Zoom my entire career at HubSpot. And I think the thing that, and I just had this conversation with one of our leaders yesterday. I think the thing that's really important if you're a TA leader is really, there can be a tendency when you're in a really results-driven operational function like recruiting to get in a room with your leaders or a virtual room with your leaders and just focus on the results and the deliverables. And here's how my team is performing relative to the hiring plan or whatever it might be. And by the way, I've spent so much of my career solely focused on that. I think getting comfortable taking a step back and asking leaders, what keeps you up at night from a talent perspective? What are you thinking about as it pertains to hiring, retaining, and developing your talent? And starting your conversations more organically and at that altitude can actually help you build trust because it's more of a thought partnership than a transaction. And I was having this conversation with one of our leaders yesterday, and they were remarking the conversation we're having is it's not operational, it's not transactional. And I think there's a tendency when you're in this type of a role to go straight to the operational plan, go straight to the execution. And I'm a total, my strengths finder is hardcore executor, and getting comfortable sitting in that strategic thinking. I find that's when I have the best conversations with our leaders because we're thinking big picture, we're bouncing ideas off of each other, we're not constrained by a framework or an operational plan or a target, and we can think a little bit bigger picture and kind of walk out with more questions than answers. I find that actually helps deepen relationships with leaders to develop, which then in turn develops some of those champions. I think the other thing, I think there's a tendency to always focus on the hiring managers or the interviewers or the business leaders who are the most challenging to work with and get them to be great or get them to be great partners. I find that as much as you do that, you also have to celebrate the really great partners early because they create a model for other leaders across the business of what good looks like. And so I think being able not just to say, go to a business leader and say, hey, your leaders need to be doing this, or your directors are not, helping out enough, or, your managers aren't interviewing. Instead, focus on celebrating, hey, this person is being a great partner. You should use them as a model. It just creates a much more one team, positively rooted approach.
That's really cool. Just as you were saying that, I was thinking, when you're a business and you're working with a suite of different clients, you don't just focus on the most challenging ones. You focus on the ones that are great partners, and you build case studies and you promote them, externally into other clients that you want to work with. Why don't we do that internally as well and create these case studies, the great stakeholders that we're working with that really make our jobs enjoyable, and promote their behaviors to the rest of the business? I mean, that's a really cool idea.
It's great. And I got to give credit to, there's a woman who runs our executive recruiting team on my team. Her name's Devin Brown. And she every month presents to our leadership team on executive hiring. And she always calls out, the challenging searches, or, the ones that we're struggling with and the hiring managers we're struggling with, and has the CTAs to their leaders on what they need to be doing. And she was the one who actually said to me, I got to start calling out the ones that are going really well and celebrating those. And it completely changes the tone of everything. And then all of a sudden, their peers are going to them saying, hey, I want to learn how you're being such a great model hiring manager or partner or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because even for those leaders, like, one of the traits of being an incredible leader is being able to hire great people, right? That is a competence that you are measured on. So being good at that is a skill, and something that everyone's hopefully trying to get better at. So yeah, I really love that. That's great. And none of this, I guess, would be possible without having a great team who can help you achieve all those things. So when you're building out your teams, is there something you specifically look for, attributes you look for in recruiting leaders that come into your team, or senior recruitment leaders?
I think I think my perspective on this has really evolved over the past few years as we have, one, grown and scaled our team really rapidly, but also really created a strong position that we want to hire a great talent, remarkable talent that is reflective of the diversity of the customer base that we support. Our recruiting team is comprised of people who came from big tech companies, small tech companies, completely different industries, never been in recruiting before, first generation, returners from other areas of the business. Maybe they were in leadership roles and then moved into individual contributor roles. I don't think there is a mold of what a great recruiter looks like. I think what makes a great recruiting team is actually a collection of really different backgrounds and experiences and perspectives. And instead focusing on the skills and the attributes that make a great recruiting team, my team is comprised of people who are excellent problem solvers. They are incredibly data-driven. They're curious and they ask great questions. They're coachable and like really humble and open to feedback. And so we've worked really hard. I will tell you, 5 or 6 years ago, we only looked at recruiters who came from, software recruiting or tech recruiting from a tech company. And instead, by really challenging ourselves to focus on what makes great stakeholder partnership, what makes a great proactive recruiter who can manage a funnel really well, you can gain those skills in a completely different environment. And so I'm really proud of my team for really pushing themselves on challenging biases and really focusing on skills versus experience. And it makes it harder, right? Because you can't just look on a resume and spend 10 seconds and say, oh, we're going to put this person through. It requires a lot of work to really get to know a candidate. But I do think that is what makes us a really good recruiting team. Now, I think the thing that is really challenging when you grow really rapidly is being super clear on the expectations and what the measures of success are in a role. And I will tell you, if you were to ask any recruiter on my team, they will tell you that what we defined as success and good performance in 2019 is so different from how we define it today. And we haven't done a great job of like bringing everyone along on that journey. And we're actually in an exercise right now of clearly defining roles and responsibilities at each level. But I do think you marry some of the skill, like a real deep understanding of the skills that make a great team with very clear expectations on what a recruiter should deliver in terms of results, but also impact and behaviors that they should be exhibiting. And then make sure you have a team of managers who can hold their recruiters accountable to that. And, strong performance management is a big part of it.
Absolutely. And I'm guessing from what you were saying there, the kind of performance framework that you have is a mixture of qualitative and quantitative metrics, right? Yeah.
It is. And I will tell you, like, we have work to do. We went from like I said, we went from a 70-person team a couple of years ago to a 250-person team, and like org structures and roles and responsibilities, that's going to break. And so if you don't like nurture that and manage it and iterate it on along the way, you're going to result in some cracks in your foundation. And so we are definitely at that point right now. So I will not say we have it all figured out for what the 500-person recruiting org needs to look like in terms of being high performing, but getting back to basics it's a big investment, but it helps create such a high performing team.
And it's a really complex thing, because you can obviously look at industry benchmarks and external benchmarks, but every company is different. So you have to use that rolling data as well from your own organization, because you have your own complexities and challenges and timeframes on things. One of the things that you touched upon on earlier was bringing people in with the right skills and not experience. Does that require, I guess, a more robust onboarding, where you're maybe training up the areas that the knowledge gaps that they don't have, and how have you done that effectively at HubSpot, or how are you handling that?
I think that what you're calling out right now is the reason why so many companies who say that they're committed to building a diverse workforce fail at building a diverse workforce, because it's not just about the hiring. It's how you set all of those non-traditional backgrounds or profiles who may require a bit more ramping. It's how you set them up for success. And by the way, we've failed at this before, where we have hired, for example, software engineers from coding boot camps and then expecting them to reach productivity at the same time frame as someone who just spent 4 years at a computer science program at a prestigious university. That's just not reasonable. That's not systemically, like, there is a ton of inequity there. And so if you're a company who says you care about bringing in diverse perspectives and experiences and not relying on one kind of experience, it's on you as an organization to make sure you're providing the support system to help ramp people up. And so whether it's like complex onboarding for an engineer who may not have grown up with a CS degree, or one of the things that we've realized really early on in hiring, for example, people who might be later in their career, is that they've never worked in a company that used Google Suite as their like system of record for email and calendar management and everything. And I will tell you, I came from a company, I think I mentioned this to you last time, that used Lotus Notes. And so for me, having never been at a company that used G Suite, even just figuring out how to use a Google Doc in a work context was really challenging for me. And I think sometimes we overlook those gaps that people might have coming in. And our learning and development team has done such a great job taking feedback as some people with different experiences or backgrounds have come in, and ensuring that we're layering and creating onboarding that can kind of close the gap for those people, whether it is, deeper things on how to use our different collaboration tools, whether it is additional onboarding for recruiters who may have never done a phone interview before, may have never extended an offer before, and making sure you're getting everyone to the same baseline.
Awesome. And I actually read a few articles, I'm not stalking you, I promise, from you, where you're talking about moving into your role as global director of recruiting at 8 months pregnant. And I know that on the topic of DE&I, you're really passionate about returning parents coming back to work, and you've run a project at HubSpot. Could you maybe talk about that and where that came from, how you implemented it, and I guess how it's going?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I am like many, especially in the past couple of years, it is a struggle to be a working parent, especially a working mother in a global pandemic. Even not in a global pandemic, it's hard. But I'm also conscious of the fact that, I'm also in a place of privilege. I have a partner who is very supportive. I am a white cisgender woman. And so, there are elements of privilege in that. And I think because of that, part of what I am deeply committed to is to creating opportunities for other working parents, particularly working mothers, because I feel so fortunate to have had all the opportunities that I've had in my career. And as you called out, HubSpot took a bet on me by promoting me into a global role when I was 8 months pregnant with my third child. A lot of other industries that would have like nail in the coffin on your career, right? And so to get promoted into a role and then get 4 months of parental leave and then to come back and to go into a pandemic, it's a lot of work, but I also feel so fortunate. And so part of my goal as I think about inclusion on our team is particularly inclusion for caregivers. And I think HubSpot has done a phenomenal job really taking a stand that we value flexibility and hybrid work. And so we were committed to remote work and hybrid work long before the pandemic. In fact, several months before the pandemic, we made the commitment that 70% of our open roles would not be required to be tied to a HubSpot office. Now, more than 80% of our employees are not in an office, more than half the week. And so I think the commitment to hybrid is huge. Our recruiting team is very distributed geographically within the entities we operate in, but we've also invested in a returner program specifically for folks within recruiting and our broader people operations team. And we partner with an organization called Path Forward to help us identify cohorts of people that have taken more than 2 years out of the workforce. It's most often women, and it's most often for caregiving for their children, although we have some elder caregivers as well. And creating pathways for them to re-enter the workforce. And we have some amazing folks who joined our team in January and are just doing truly remarkable work and adding diverse perspective in a world, like in an industry, the tech industry skews much younger. And so to bring people in with different experiences, it makes our team better.
Awesome. And that was an organization called Path Forward, you said?
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Great. And they create essentially cohorts, and they present them to the company, and you get to kind of interview them and bring them through your process. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We were able to do kind of info sessions with candidates who had opted into the program. There were a number of different companies that were part of our cohort, and it was a great opportunity, and it's something that we're continuing to grow and invest in.
Awesome.
We actually originated our returnship program out of our Dublin office several years ago. And so I also love that we started it outside of the U.S. and we're able to take something that worked in Europe and bring it to one of our U.S. offices.
Awesome. Well, I could speak to you all day about this, I feel like, but I'll have a final question for you, because it seems like you've gone through such a journey, different industries, you've worked in different places, and now heading up things at HubSpot. What are you most excited about in talent acquisition? What do you think is the future for this industry?
I think, as we talked about at the very beginning, the TA industry has been on such a wild ride, and there has been rapid growth and expansion. There have been an endless list of tools and automations to help scale hiring and do all of this. And it's been a bit of a frenetic pace. I'm actually really excited for what the next several months are going to bring for talent acquisitions teams to really take a pause, take a breath, and reflect on what makes great hiring in their respective organizations. And in a world where for the past 2.5 years, we've had so much pressure on growth and scale and volume, we can actually learn from what the past 2 years have brought us. And so for me, as I think about, specifically for HubSpot, I'm really excited to invest in some of the foundations of our operating system. I'm excited to really get alignment on what good is going to look like over the long term. And I'm excited for our recruiters after 2 years where they've just been cranking and delivering on great work, to actually take a step back and, do more work on less work on just straight execution and more project work and process optimization and getting their own growth. I think what we're going to see coming out of this is a really well-rounded recruiter who is able to be a true talent partner. I think the organizations that are going to use this time to their advantage and not waste a crisis are going to have talent teams that are much more well-rounded and truly strategic partners. And I feel like, I feel lucky to be at a company where I think we're going to be able to do that too.
Awesome. So setting the foundations for the next boom and making sure that you're not on the back foot.
That's exactly right. Because I do think we, like many companies, we spent the past 3 years a kick back on our heels just trying to catch up. And so now it's about how do you take a breath, how do you pause, how do you recharge and reset and get ready and like really invest in preparing for the inevitable next boom that's going to come out.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for talking to me today, Becky. I'm sure the viewers will really enjoy this conversation, and I'll see you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for having me, Chris.